medical reason.
Oh, well, they're not, because I just crossed the border last night. And they didn't, I don't know if they've passed it, they didn't institute it yet. Because he wouldn't hear.
Quarantine?
Yeah,
Or
I'm
you
in
told him
quarantine
you
again.
crossed for the vaccine and he said, too bad.
And it was essential for me. I had a doctor's letter.
And he still wouldn't, so he still quarantined
Yeah,
you?
she said.
Did he make you take a test at the border?
No, I didn't need a test.
Oh, that didn't
I
start.
already had a test. I had a test from the day before.
Uh-huh.
I have a negative test that I took on Tuesday. So I presented, I got the results on Wednesday and I crossed the border on Wednesday. So so I told them, not only am I negative, but I also had the shots. And that's why I went in, Bedafka, for that reason. Not for vacation, I wasn't in Florida. So he says it doesn't, the shot in essential is it's essential for Canada. Not for
you getting a
for
vaccine,
me.
but you getting a vaccine is also essential for Canada because Canada can't get their own vaccine. So you subsidize the Canadian government.
The guy's not a London, what can I tell you?
What a shame.
He does what he's told.
Wow. When you say you presented a test, what exactly did you present? The certificate?
The test? No, when you take a test, it's positive or negative, and they email you the results. I printed it out and I brought it along.
So all you did was you presented him a piece of paper.
That's right.
So why can't anybody generate that piece of paper?
They probably
Does he have
could.
a way of verifying it?
Well, sure, it's got a lot of information on it. You can call the source.
Did anyone do that?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay, so I'd love to get a copy of what that certificate looks like.
Yeah, right. But he did question it. Is this the right kind? What kind is this? And he was a little puzzled when he saw the paper, but so he accepted it.
It's not. So whatever you showed him is not what he was expecting to see.
I guess not. What else could he be expecting other than some documentation?
I hear. Okay, no, it's good to know. Okay, let's see the Heilige Mishnah. I believe today is Vav Adar, it's the 6th day of Adar, if I'm not mistaken. Tomorrow is Moshe Rabbeinu's birthday. One who tells his servant, say Ushchait Alayas Pesach, go and shecht for me a korban Pesach. So he appointed his servant to do this for him, but he didn't say should it be a gdi, should it be a kla. So shachat gdi yochel, shachat kla yochel. Whatever he ends up shechting, whatever the Eved selects as the korban will be acceptable. Shachat gdi utla. What if he did both? So then yochel Rishon, we say that the adon is automatically connected to the first korban, and I guess the second korban is going to be apostle. It'll be Moshe's Pesach. Shachach ma'amar. What if the servant forgot what his rabbi said? So he's by the market, he's buying his 2 animals, yet he forgot which one he was supposed to buy. Ketzad Yasa, this is what he should do. Yishachat la'ugdi. He'll have them both shechted in the Beis HaMikdash as the korban Pesach. The Yomer, and he should make a tanai. Im gedi amar li Rebbe. If my Odin wanted a gedi, well then gedi shaloi. Then the gedi will be his korban Pesach. Utla shali, and the tla will be my korban Pesach. Then tla amar li Rebbe. Then that tla shaloi ugdi shali. So that's the tonight they'll have to make by the acquisition, by the shchita. What happens if the Adon was also unsure? What happens if Shachach Rabbi Ma'amalai? So we know the Adon specified either Gdi or Kla, and nobody knows what it was that the Adon specified. So now we don't know which one to give him. So therefore, Shneim Yetzu Lebeis Esreifa. They're both going to be now puzzle because you don't know which one, in fact, the Adon is Mamuna upon. And we also don't know, because of that, which one the Eved is Adon is money on. So therefore, neither one can eat it. However, the korban itself is kosher. The whole problem is no one can eat it. So therefore, they won't have to make a Pesach Sheni, but they're not going to be able to be yoy to the mitzvah of Achilas Korban Pesach. In fact, Pshita, if the other told Evid, go shech for me a Korban Pesach, and didn't specify what type he wanted, Gedi or Tle, so of course whatever the Evid selects will be considered a valid carbon. So Gemara, no, shachat Gedi yoichel af al gav the rogel b'tle. Even though this Odin every year used a Tle, clearly that was his preference, and you by mistake got him a Gedi, you might think that shouldn't be a good carbon Pesach, because that's not what the Odin's das was. Kamash Malon, the Odin will be happy to accept that because he didn't specify it. Shachat le yoichal af al gav the rogel b'gedi, even though normally the Odin used to use a Gedi. Dr. Gemara, shachat Gedi tle yoichal min harishon. How is that possible? How is that possible? He took these two animals to the Beis Hamikdash, and you cannot be mamuna on both of them. So if you cannot be mamuna on both of them, how is it possible that both of these karbonos are kosher? Unless you come on to Breger, which we know you can't use. So the Mishnah is referring to not a regular person who's more particular about exactly what he's eating. He makes his own decisions. Rather, it's the Melech Malcha of Rashi Shetluin Alavdeyan. They makbidin al sudasim giyim kloim. They don't have time nor effort to analyze in such great detail. Whatever the White House kitchen proposes, whatever the palace kitchen prepares, that's how it works. And when the king comes to dinner every night, they don't bring him a menu and then he picks a la carte. Whatever the staff prepared for him is what he accepts. So therefore, automatically, the first one that was attributed to the king and the queen would be the one that is the real carbon, and the second one is just extra, therefore it's possible. In fact, more Batanya ain't nimnin al shnei psachim ke'echad. I'm sorry, Batanya's benichusa. Batanya, and we learned a raya to this that we're saying that a melech and a malcha are different. Is going to say ain't nimnin al shnei psachim ke'echad. Umayse b'melech u'malcha she'amulav den. Once upon a time, a melech and a malcha told their servant to yishachtu aleinu sepesach. Go and shech for us to Pesach. And the servants ended up shechting two carbon pesachs. They asked the king, what should we do? Ask my wife. Then they turned to the wife and say, okay, what should we do? Go ask Rabbi Gamliel. They don't focus on what it is. They rely on their servants to prepare something appropriate. Will say they're automatically connected to the first covenant. Anan, but a regular person like us, because it's going to come out to Breira, and therefore we cannot use either covenant. And another story that happened by this king and queen, there was a sheret, Tomei. It's a sheret that they assumed it was dead, and it was found in another pots. And because of that, it's going to make now everything Tomei. They asked the king, what should we do? Ask the Malka. So they asked Gamliel. He said, let me ask you a question. So you're sure that this sheret is dead? Let me ask you a question. What is it in? What is it in now? Is it in a hot soup or is it in a cold soup? This sheret that you found floating around. They told him, it's in a hot soup. I'm not so sure the sheret is dead. Plunge cold water over it. And it gave a move. Oh, it's still alive. It still has some breath inside it. It's not metami yet. Then they quickly took it out before it really died. And because of that, Rabbi Gamliel uncovered that in fact the sheret was never dead, and the Suda is still her. Nimta Melech Talib Mamalka, the king that relies on the queen, that's an old story. And Nimta Malka Tluya Gamliel. And Malka was telling Gamliel, Nimta Kol Suda Tluya Rabbi Gamliel. Everything was dependent on Rabbi Gamliel. On the Al Daf, there's something called histories of the Daf. That someone makes a small presentation every day. So he analyzes it and he suggests that this king here is Agrippas HaMelech, Agrippas, we learned about him a while ago. He was the one who wanted to know from the Kohen Gadol how many Korban Pesachs were brought each year. And it brought down that he said that Agrippas had a very troubled childhood, and he only got the Malchus because of a stroke of luck. He married a woman who was very, very powerful, and she was learned. So it makes sense that he would ask his wife. That stimmed also. And she was smart enough to defer to Rabbi Gamliel, so that when he gets upset at her, he shouldn't cut her head off, that she bossed him around. So she deferred to Rabbi Gamliel. But that's what he wants to suggest. And maybe it was Agrippas HaMelech. So he only became a king because he married her, similar to Bill Clinton. Oops. Zok to Gemara weiter. Shachach Masha Amar Lo Rabbi. What happens if the Eved forgot? So what does the Mishnah say? He could bring both korbanos, and they'll say, whichever one the Adon wants should be for him, and whichever one the Adon doesn't want should be for me. The problem is, if he's an Eved, how could he have anything? How could he buy anything? Shali Mashakon Eved Kana Rabbi. Anything that he owns, by definition, belongs to the Adon. So how could he have ownership of his own korban? Amar Abaye, I'll tell you how you do it. Don't just go to any retailer. Go to a retailer who the proprietor knows his Adon well, and is good friends with his Adon, and will do special things to help the Adon succeed in what he's trying to accomplish. The Nichle b'tekant the rabbi, who makna lechad v'nayu al manash she'ein l'rabbi rishus b'y. And what he will do is, he will be makna one, which one is going to be telling at night. But he'll tell the Eved, one of these two animals, the one that you intend for using for your Korban Pesach, I'm being makna that one to you, al manash, that your Adon doesn't have a tvisa in it. And then it works that the Adon shouldn't own it, and it should belong to the Eved. And of course, this arrangement, Avad the Adon in this case is happy with it, because that's the only way to make this transaction work. What if the Adon also forgot it? What is the instruction for it? Amar Abaye, that we say that although neither korban can be eaten, but they're both kosher korbanos, and because of that they don't have to bring, neither the Eved nor the Adon have to bring another korban by Pesach Sheni. That would only be relevant if after the korbanos were spritzed, and that means they were in the Siratzah Chosoi, only then did everyone get mixed up as to which one the Adon specified. The Be'idin, the Izrik Dam, at the moment of the Zrika, have a Chazal Achila. We knew specifically which animal was going to be for the Adon, and we knew specifically which animal was going to be for the Eved. So everything was hunky-dory up until that point. And then the korban was done by kashrus, and now you forgot which one to eat. So you can't eat either of them, but you were yoy to the mitzvah of korban pesach. But if this confusion already set in before the Zrika, that means before the korban was kosher, we already knew it doesn't have oichlin because it's already in a matzav of confusion. The chiyizuk dam will have a chazal achila. Then chayav nasis pesach sheni. That of course would mess up the korban. But at the time of the Zrika, it has to be royu to la'achila, and if it's confused already before the Zrika, it wouldn't be royu la'achila. Ika de masin la brayso. There are those who quote this halacha of Abaye that the kula only applies of shachar achas Zrika to a different case, where there was also confusion. There's 5 buddies that brought their korban pesach. They each brought their own, but they brought them together. And then we learned that each one gets back their oir. Their meat is wrapped up in like a package made out of leather. And what happened was then I guess they were all examining their oiris after they separated it, and they got mixed up. And when they analyzed the 5 oiris later, not knowing which one belonged to who, they found a boil on one of the skins, which would indicate that it had a mum, which would indicate that one of their 5 korbanos was puzzle. So one korban here is a puzzle korban. What do you do? Of course, you have to burn these korbanos. Not one of them are allowed to be eaten, because each one into Suffolk, maybe this is the one that had the mum. But nevertheless, they don't have to make a Pesach Sheni. They can't eat it, but at least they were yoich in the midst of Pesach Sheni. And on that, Abaye said, the only time we will say that at least the people who are yoich the korban are yoich the korban, that's only if this confusion occurred after this Rika, the Be'inad is of Dam, Mia Hava Chazi Lachia. If if we already found out that one of these 5 karbanos has a mum before the zrika, that means the zrika was never done properly, and therefore all of them chayav and lasos Pesach sheni. If you learn in our Mishnah's case, where really there's no internal pagam in the carbon, it's just that I don't know which one is mine. Nevertheless, if that occurred before the zrika, we'll passel both karbanos, and we'll be mechayev both of them to bring a Pesach sheni. Well, koshka in a brisa where there was actually a real psul found in one of the karbanos, it actually has a mum. But man de masne brisa. But if you only quoted Abaye's halacha that if this had occurred before the zrika, they're all puzzle. Maybe I would say alav masnisin loy. Maybe by the Mishnah, even if it happened before the zrika, there'd be a place to argue that they would still all be kosher. Both karbanos will be kosher, and they would not have to bring a Pesach sheni, because given the since the karbanos themselves are perfectly kosher, and as a matter of fact, the itkar havachazal achila, if they would remember what exactly the instructions were, who gets the tle, who gets the gdi, this would be a fine carbon. So therefore, comes Shemaya Galia, that we say that these karbanos are good, and even though we don't know whose are who, but these are kosher karbanos, and you might have a place to argue that even before Shrika, these karbanos are good, and you don't have to bring Pesach sheni. Kamash Malon, Abaye, if he said it on the Mishnah, that even here you'd have to bring a Pesach sheni. Amamar, Upurmilas Pesach sheni. Now let's go analyze. You have 5 guys. After they're on their way home, they're analyzing their iris, and they realize that one of the 5, their carbon was puzzle. So the halacha is no one has to bring a Pesach sheni. Frank the Gemara, out of the 5 people, 4 of them were Yotze, the carbon Pesach. But one of them, we know his carbon had a mum. So he wasn't Yotze. So how are you going to solve his problem? Why doesn't he have to bring a Pesach sheni? The problem is we can't identify who this person is, and there's no way for us to do it. What are we supposed to do? Are you going to suggest that all 5 of them should bring another carbon Pesach because they might be the one whose carbon had a mum? That's not allowed. For sure, 4 out of these 5 people who are already Yotze are bringing chun lazar. They are buying minayu abdilu. For sure, 4 of these people were already Yotze the carbon Pesach. So you might suggest lesi kula chat Pesach. How about they should all chip in for 1 more carbon, and they'll all be part of that carbon? You can't do that either, because nimtza Pesach nekal shaloi lemnuyav. It's going to end up being eaten by somebody who wasn't allowed to eat it. So that you can't do that either. So haimai, what should we do? How about nesi kol chad minayu peschoi? Let each person bring their carbon Pesach, another carbon. V'nisni, and they should each make a t'nai when they bring the carbon. The name they should say, Id di balmum, if my first carbon was a balmum, and therefore I have not yet been mekayim the mitzvah of carbon Pesach, well, hide the ice to hash another Pesach. So the animal that I'm bringing now should be a carbon Pesach. But the Id di tam, but if my original carbon was good, and it was a tam, come to hide the ice and hashta, now have a shlomim. I want it to be a shlomim. We know that if you have an extra Pesach, a leftover Pesach, it's brought as a shlomim. So let them bring it as a shlomim. So all 5 can bring another carbon, and they can do it all tonight, either a Pesach or a shlomim. So there's a technical difficulty here that has to be raised, and that is, when is this happening? We already all brought our Pesachim. We're at the end of the day. And now I'm going to come in and bring another Pesach. That's mishkafelach, because the Pesach is supposed to be brought after the Talmud Shalbein Arbayim. But 4 out of these 5 are bringing a shlomim. You're not allowed to bring a shlomim after the carbon Talmud Shalbein Arbayim. So what the Achrayim are masber is to save somebody from a potential of an Isser Kares of not bringing the carbon Pesach. Maybe we would waive that rule of bringing a carbon after the Talmud Shalbein Arbayim. But it's just important to highlight that that's what's happening here. So Timur, you can't do this. You can't do this where each one brings another carbon out tonight. That would not be a possibility, because there's a big difference between a shlomim and a Pesach. And the primary big difference is what happens to the chaz of a shaykh, the breast and the thigh of that animal. By a shlomim, it's have to go to a kohen. So if I have over here a carbon that might be a shlomim, and the chaz of a shaykh has to go to the kohen, but the kohen can't eat it because If it's a carbon Pesach and the coin who I give the chazav shaykh to wasn't on the list, wasn't registered, then we have a problem with giving the chazav shaykh to the coin. That's
Could he be
the
Michael? Could the coin be Michael? His chaz of a shaykh?
It seems like not. It seems like he has like a din of truma. A person wouldn't be able to eat it. So Frank Gemara, like Chaim Tzvi asked. So v'nesi kol chad v'chad kohen b'hdei. Let everyone bring a coin with him, and the coin will also be part of it. That if this guy has to bring a korban pesach, so this is a korban pesach, but I'm part of the korban pesach. And if this guy already brought a korban pesach because his korban was kosher, then this will be just a shlamim. Dr. Murr, that's not a good idea. That'll solve your problem, but it's not going to solve the coin's problems. Because high coin, hey chadami. Let's analyze this coin. Eat of it Pesach. If he already brought his own korban Pesach, so then that wouldn't work because Dilma High Pesach on the side that this is the guy whose korban was possible. So now this korban that he's bringing is a korban Pesach. The coin can't eat that korban because the coin already was Yosy korban Pesach. V'nimtza Pesach necha shaloi l'nuyav. V'deloy of it Pesach, and if it's a coin who didn't do his korban Pesach yet, well, then Dilma Shlomim hu v'loy of it Pesach. If this ends up being the Shlomim, then this coin is left out, so he doesn't have his korban Pesach. Well, then let's try a different thing. The Nasi, let's just look at the back. The Nasi Kulu Chamisha Chad coin. Instead of each one bringing a separate coin, let them all bring their separate korban that's going to be a Savik Shlom and Savik Pesach, but they should all contract with the same coin and say if it's a Shlomim, so you'll get the Shlomim, and if it's a Pesach, you'll be Yotze the korban Pesach. This way, the coin could for sure be Yotze because one of these five will be a korban Pesach. So when they say Kula Chamisha Chat coin, the loy of it Pesach, find the coin, of course, who wasn't Yotze the mitzvah korban Pesach yet. V'nimni aluya Hanech Chamisha Pesachim, and let him join on all these five Pesachim and all these five korbanos. The Miman of Shach Ikachad the loy of it Pesach. For sure, one of these five korbanos will be the korban Pesach because we know one of these five, the korban that he brought, the original korban that he brought, in fact, had a mum. The Kanafik Bay, and now the coins for sure be Yotze. So why can't you do that? The reason why you can't do that is there's a rule: you're not allowed to bring a korban if, because of the way you're bringing it, you're going to limit the amount of time that it could be eaten. For instance, we know that we don't bring a korban toida on Erev Yom Kippur or on Erev Pesach. Why? Because it's supposed to be eaten for a day and a night. Since you're not going to be able to eat it tonight, you don't want to bring a korban Pesach in such a way. You don't want to bring any korban in such a way where we're going to have to limit its eating time less than what the Torah prescribed for it. So here, Dilu Pesach L'Yom V'Layla. If this animal is a korban Pesach, I could only eat it until the end of tonight, which is the first night of Pesach. But Vilu Shlomim, a Shlomim Ikar Din, how long could you eat it? L'Shnei Yom V'Layla Echad, I'd be able to eat it until tomorrow evening. And since by making it a Suffolk korban Pesach, you're making a korban that's going to be a Shlomim that will limit its eating ability rather than till tomorrow night, till end of tonight. That's why it wouldn't be allowed. Okay, so how about the Nesher Moshe or Pesach? What you do is, we know that something that was supposed to be a korban Pesach and it got left over, and there were two ways for that to happen. Either I've set aside a lot of money to buy my korban Pesach, and then when they went to buy it, it turns out that the animals were much cheaper. So now I have extra cash. So I could buy a korban with that. That'll be called a Moshe Pesach. Or another thing that's called a Moshe Pesach is somebody who bought an animal and he lost the animal. And then he brought a new korban Pesach, and then the animal was recovered. So he has a Moshe Pesach. We know that becomes a Shlomim. But that becomes a Shlomim whose Achila is limited to 1 day and 1 night. So if he takes the korban and says, I want to be makdish this as a Moshe Pesach, it should either be a Suffolk Moshe Pesach or a Suffolk Shlomim. There you won't have a problem. The name and let him say it following tonight. If my original korban Pesach was a Balmum and I was not yet Yotze the mitzvah of korban Pesach, so I say Hashton have a Pesach. So let's say this korban that I'm bringing now is a Pesach. And Tam, and if my korban Pesach originally was good, so now I don't need another korban Pesach. Tamu, have a Haida Hashton Shlomim. Let it be a Shlomim. So it's really the same territory as before. We're just getting around the problem that I'm reducing the amount of time that it could be eaten. The Moshe Pesach, Nechal Yom V'Layla Echad, just like the carbon Pesach. Correct, that's not a good idea. The Chima Frishan Tchila L'Moishris. Moisher Pesach means something occurred. Now you have extra. You can't look at Tchila be makdish something to be an extra. It doesn't work that way. So okay, no problem. There's a big crowd out there. For sure, there's got to be someone in Klal Yisrael who has extra money that's Moshe Pesach, or someone who lost his carbon and then found it. So look around for the sake of helping these 5 people be Yotze, or at least the last person who we don't know, let him be Yotze. We'll find such a scenario. Let him buy that animal, the Naisi Moshe Pesach. Let him take this Moshe Pesach and do the same tonight and say, if I was Yotze already, this will be a Shlamim. And if I wasn't Yotze, this will be a Chatos. This will be a Pesach, I'm sorry. Ela Mishum Smicha. The problem is there's going to be a difference in the Smicha. The Pesach loy boy Smicha. The carbon Pesach you don't make Smicha on. And you're not allowed to make Smicha on an animal that's supposed to have, that's not supposed to have Smicha, because it's called being Mishamish with a behem of hectares. Vilu Moiser boy Smicha. But Moiser Chatos, which is brought as a Shlomim, you do have to make Smicha on. And therefore, you're not going to be able to process this carbon properly. In fact, carbon anoshim. We understand if it's a man's carbon, but carbon noshim, if this was a woman's carbon, where a woman's carbon never needs smicha, my ikalamemar. Elamishum. So what if this was a carbon pesach that originally belonged to a woman, and now it's a Moshe pesach? So it would never have a chiv to make smicha. Elamishum matanois. The problem is the dam that you spritz for a shlomim is different than the dam that you spritz for a carbon pesach, and therefore you're not going to be able to make this rika properly. Dilu pesach matanakas. By a carbon pesach, they just pour some of the blood on the wall of the mizbeach. Dilu shlomim itstein shein arba. You have to have 2 matanas, one in each opposite corner, which ends up spreading to 2 walls each, so you get all 4 walls. Zok to Gemara, my nafkamina, big deal. So he won't make this rika properly. It'll be kosher anyway. But not kol nitn al gabe mizbeach, kol nitn al mizbeach achitzain. Any dam that you're supposed to spritz on the mizbeach achitzain, shenosnan b'matan achas, and you just made 1 matana. So even if you didn't do it properly, but you just did 1 matana in the right mizbeach, keep here. It will be a good kapara. So hu adin here, even though you don't do shtayim shein arba, it would be kosher for shlamim. So Gemara, there's still a problem. Elamishum the ilu pesach b'shvicha. The halach is by the carbon pesach that they just pour the blood down the wall of the mizbeach. Ilu shlamim b'zrika. By carbon shlamim, you actually have to throw the blood and splash it on the wall of the mizbeach. So again, there's a difference in the way the dam is spritzed. So once again, but the evidence good anyway. But Tanya called nitnin b'zrika shenasna b'shvicha yatsa. So the Gemara ema the kamrinon the evet. Sure, if you made the matnas dam wrong, but the evet it will be a good carbon. But the chatchila nami to set up the chatchila to do a carbon where you know there's a good chance that the dam is not going to be done properly, that we don't do. Since we can't do that, this 5th guy, the person who is unknown, but he wasn't judged at a carbon pesach, we have no way for him to fix that. So these are the important toises. Just a couple of important toises. So let's see this toises. This will only be a problem if you have to put your full weight on the animal when you do smicha. The loibayin and the koldu, with just a gentle touch on the head of the animal, that wouldn't be a problem anyway, and you'd be able to do it even though it was a carbon pesach, it wouldn't pass it. But now, Tosha has a very important kasha. Hanimili b'di'evid. B'di'evid, if you made this rika the wrong way, it would be good. But how could we allow someone to lechatchila make a carbon with the wrong rika? So Tosha says, "Wudin akulu amrin hachi asmicha v'avatanas hanoiser." They'll say that on everything. V'tema, fact Tosha, the chibishvil the shema yiyad noiser or mishum smicha the loyma akva or loyasu matanas kil chosan yikanis lo deisaf the curse. What is the consequence if you spritz the blood in the wrong way? None at all, but the evidence kosher. Or even though the previous complications that the Gemara discussed, you can't make the smicha properly. If you don't make the smicha, you're yoytza anyway. Or the fact that you're limiting the amount of time that the carbon is allowed to be eaten for. Those are all minor problems compared to someone who doesn't bring a carbon pesach, who'll be chayav kares. So why would we, for a technicality, not allow someone? If anything, we should waive all those other concerns to save someone from potentially entering a situation which chayv paris. Yeshloim is a so this is Yosy halacha l'maisa. The toiv sheyitcha safek kares b'shov al tasa. Leave good enough alone. Better even put yourself into a matzav. You're not putting yourself. Better remain in a matzav of safek kares, but you're not doing anything actively. Here, 4 out of 5 guys were already yoy to the Korban Pesach. So 4 out of 5 guys are going to be doing this rika in the wrong way. So what Tosfos is saying is, even though the isser of not bringing a Korban Pesach is more chamer, but you're not doing anything to be over this isser. So you're better off not even doing something lechatchila that's merely lechatchila not a di'evet. In other words, don't split something the wrong way, even though that's only lechatchila, but di'evet, it'll be a good rika. Don't do that to save yourself from the Shavakars. Leave good enough alone. It's a huge chiddush, and the Reb Zilberstein in the Sefer Chashukei Chemet, Reb Zilberstein is Reb Chaim Kanievsky's brother-in-law. He says halacha l'maisa, someone loyal who has to go to the hospital on Shabbos, and he has a choice. He can either take public transportation, which is not going to violate any isser really, at least in the isser deraisa. You get on a bus, or you have to call a Jewish ambulance, and they're going to have to be Michal Shabbos and take you to the hospital. What should you do? The problem is if you go on public transportation, people are going to see you. People are going to see you. Zokt Zilberstein, Sharon Tosfos is, and Tosfos sticks it in, Nimash Yasser Ruben Shaloi Kohen. He's stressing that point. The point is, the problem with Ruben Shaloi Kohen is if you see 4 people are making the wrong zrika, if people see that 4 karbonis, the wrong zrika is made, so now you're misleading the public. Now the public is going to start confusing what the right zrika is. That's a much worse thing. Dr. Zilberstein, if you go on a public bus to the hospital where everyone sees, that's a million times worse because people are going to think, oh, maybe you're allowed to go on the bus on Shabbos. That's a lot worse than being Mechal Shabbos for Pekuch Nefesh, even though it's a real Chil Shabbos, but at least it won't lead to making multiple people make a mistake.
Because not more people see the ambulance. The ambulance makes a bigger rush in a coil when it.
Yeah, but everyone knows. Right? Everyone knows that Pekuch Nefesh. If you get on a bus, they think you're talking about Shabbos.
That's when people see get on a bus.
But I don't know if the bus is the right example. It's a way to minimize the Chil Shabbos, but publicize the event.
Yeah, why can't he do like all the guys do when they go down to Miami? They put on the cap.
What I mean to say is that it's different than calling a neighbor or getting into a car yourself.
Right.
Right? And Zilberstein brought us into an ambulance, which makes this big whole production, makes a big parade.
But it's known that it's done.
Right, but it would be different than going into a
Yosy. Yosy.
Yes, I will.
The whole question here is to be potter these 5 guys from having to bring the Pesach
the
Sheni?
one guy. The one guy. No one's bringing a Pesach Sheni. The one guy that we're trying to find him a resolution for. We're trying to find him a resolution.
But the Gemara starts off by saying he's potter from bringing Pesach Sheni.
Right.
So why does he want to be potter from bringing a Pesach Sheni? Why wouldn't he want to bring a Korban Pesach and participate in the Korban?
Well, really, the problem is neither one of them could do that, right? Until we have clarity, who's going to do that?
So let him make himself tamei.
He can't.
Why not?
Because even if he makes himself tamei, he might have already been yoich the mitzvah before he became tamei.
But you can't. Didn't we have the Gemara already that if you become tamei on the way back, you burn your korban and then you bring? Wouldn't you bring a Pesach Sheni at that point?
No.
After the zrika, before you eat it.
Exactly. Once the korban was done, up until the zrika, and it was kosher, even though you weren't able to eat any of the meat, you're yoich the mitzvah.
So once the zrika has taken place, even if you can't eat it, you're yoich to your mitzvah. So the question here, but this one guy who we don't know which one he is, isn't yoich because his korban was puzzle in the first place.
And we have no way to find out who that is and how to fix it.
But we know it's one of these 5 guys.
Correct.
So we're going to let them all off. We're going to say you're all good, as opposed to we went through the attempted remedies. There's no remedy. So you're all good. You're off the hook. Okay.
So it just means if they read your daughter any one of these 5 shidduchim, you say, they might not have brought a carbon pesach. I would never be Mishada. Okay. So you're in shidduchim now, so I have to make it real,
Okay.
right?
The Ben Ish Chai said the same thing when he heard about somebody suggesting shidduch to somebody who didn't wear 2 pairs of tefillin on his head.
Right.
He doesn't wear 2 pairs of tefillin on his head during Shabbos. Don't do Shabbos again.
Look at that. Okay, Zak Gemara. La'olam nimn olav. Up until what point can you register in a carbon? Zak Gemara. La'olam nimn olav ad sheyeh boy kazais l'kol echad v'echad. You have to have a minimum of a kazais of meat available for every one of the registries. As long as there's still enough meat that there's place for each one to have a kazais, he could join the club. Nimnin umoshchina shedei mimenu ad sheyishchit. Registration is open and cancellations are accepted up until the shechita.
But did you skip the last Mishnah?
Oh, you know something? I did. See, that's what happens when I'm reading off the document camera and not reading off my Gemara. I only see what's in focus. Thank you. Thank you very much. If someone tells his children, Hareini Sheichet is a Pesach, I'm going to shech the carbon Pesach for who? Who am I having in mind? Who am I including in a minui? He's encouraging his kids to come quickly, Bizrizas. So the child who gets here first, he's the one who's going to be included in my carbon. Zok the Mishnah. Given Sheikhus Harishan Rosh Beruba, as soon as the first person gets into the city of Yerushalayim, Zacha Bechelkai, he'll be Zaych in his chelik, Umazachas Echavimai, and then he'll drag everybody else in, so the whole family will be Min Animni, which is very impossible to understand at face value. Shemami knows Aktumara, Yesh Breyer. So right off the bat, by the time they come to Yerushalayim, the shechita is done already. I prepare Erev Yom Tov for my guests. They're coming in already on Erev Yom Tov in the afternoon. The shechita was done already. So you can say it's going to be Igloy Milsalam Afreya, who the shechita was for. Rabbi Yochanan, Zok Rabbi Yochanan, no, of course this isn't a real minui. He was just saying whoever gets it first wins the prize. There is no prize. It's merely Kedei Lazayim Mitzvahs. He was just trying to create a buzz to get his children enthusiastic, to get moving to come. But of course, he had everybody specifically in mind, and of course, this is just hyperbole. They can now prove it to you from the Brisa, from the Mishnah. How could the guy, the first son who comes, who he's the one who is money on the carbon, after the fact, it was shechted already, how could he then go and include his siblings? It's too late. The shechita was done already. So it must be that this was just like a contest to generate enthusiasm. That he really had them all in mind to be registered on the carbon shopper. That'll make sense. Can this son now include everybody else after it was shachted? But not it's the very same Mishnah. So Shmami know that this is just something to generate enthusiasm. It wasn't really technically creating any meaning. Once the girls came earlier than the boys, their enthusiasm was higher. The daughters were zrizos and the sons were lower. So they ask, the opposite of zrizos is atzelim. So it's say banos zrizos or banim atzelim. What do you mean banim shvelim? So they say that lower. So he touched it as meaning he doesn't have the respect and the high regard for the carbon. The girls in Beis Yaakov High School, they have the highest level of education, and because of that, their level of enthusiasm for the carbon Pesach is ad ein shir ad ein soif. The Banim, no, they're not so excited about it. So therefore, that leads to their atzlus. So shvelim is the precursor, it's the mental condition that will lead to atzlus. Since it's not so exciting to them, it's not held in such high esteem by them, because of that, they're not going to rush to get there. There has to be at least a kazayis available for each person. They're allowed to join and cancel registration. Things are still liquid until it's shechted, and then things are crystallized. Until there's rika. So right off the bat, they ask, Isn't halacha kol ha'omed lizarik kizarik dami? So the moment you shechted it, it's ha'omed lizarik. So there's not really a difference between Reb Shimon and the Tanakama. That the Rishonim answer is that you only say kol ha'omed lizarik kizarik dami after the Kabbalah Saddam, where you have the dam ready to make the zrika. So really, when Reb Shimon says Achi Yizruk Saddam, he means up until the Kabbalah Saddam, people are still fluid. And we'll see what that means. Makamash Malam. What is the Chiddush of our Mishnah? Hakamash Malam, the Avagav, the Imnu Alav, Burazu, even though one Chabura is already on this carbon, Chayzeres for Nimnun Alav Chabura Acheres. And Rashi, what that means is there doesn't have to be any continuity. If 10 people were in on this carbon, all these 10 people could retract and a whole different set of 10 people could join. You don't have to have one person, at least, that's continuous throughout, and that's a machloikis later on in the Tzadok Tes Rashi points out. So the Chiddush of our Mishnah holds, you can have the original registrants could be totally away, and the final registrants could be a whole different set of people. Amar Abaye, machloikis li Moshe. The machloikis where Reb Shimon extends the registration period till the zrika is only for people that want to remove themselves from the carbon. It says v'miyimat habayis mihiyos miseh. So Rashi says v'miyimat habayis in bo limayit v'limashach. That's not the pasuk shot in the pasuk, but he's dashing it. V'miyimat habayis, if you want to reduce the amount of registrants, mihiyos miseh, we learn mechayusa deseh. As long as the animal is still alive, you could reduce your registration. Reb Shimon Tzavar mehav yosa deseh. From its processing ends at the zrika. So until it's finished its processing, you can reduce the registrants. But if you want to register on a new carbon, there even Reb Shimon agrees that you cannot register onto a new carbon after the shechita occurred. You could only remove your registration from a carbon up until the zrika. So usually in our world, you can always register if there's room. You can't cancel reservations after a certain point. There it's exactly the opposite. You can only register until the shechita, but you can cancel even afterwards. So b'michsas means that people who are registering, which is referring to the shechita. So you have to do the mina, you have to register before the shechita. You're allowed to register and remove your registration until the shechita. You're allowed to pull off Achi Yisra Kedam. My next sugya is a mamash hageshmaka sugya. It talks about the problems that we, as Yeshiva Bacham, always had when we went to the restaurant together with our friends and we shared meals. And there was always one person who did most of the eating, and he was never the person who did most of the paying. How do we work that out? So this isn't a new problem. This happened even in the times of the Beis Hamikdash. Hamamana imoy echer bechalkai. What happens if we have someone in the Chabura? So there's 5 people that got together for a carbon Pesach, and one of them decided to invite his own guest on his own. So the halacha, which means now instead of me representing 1 out of 5 eaters, now I represent 2 out of 6 eaters because I brought a guest. So 2 people for sure will eat more than 1 person. So the halacha is Rishoyin b'nei Chabura litin loy esh shaloi. What they're allowed to do is they're allowed to say, okay, we're going to split it up into 5 portions. Here's your portion, and then take it and go, and you can share that with as many people as you want. But we're not sharing all of ours with all of your guests. And of course, this is totally in the machlokes that we already had. Can you eat 1 carbon Pesach in 2 chaburas? We had a machlokes tanoim. You can eat 1 Pesach in 2 chaburas. Here we're clearly saying is that you could eat 1 Pesach in 2 chaburas because we're giving him his portion and we're telling him go away and eat your portion with however many people you want to share it with. Ibayilhu. Gemara clears the shayla.
As long as they eat in one house, right?
No, they can eat in a different house too. There are a lot of completeness.
That's how we learned that has to be.
We learned if you're eating in one group, if you started eating in one group, you're then not allowed to get up and go to another area. But you could split up if you split up originally into 2 groups, that would be allowed according to that time.
I thought there was a pasuk that showed
there are 2
there has to be one house.
And they each learned the pasuk differently. One of them learned the pasuk to tell us that they have to eat it in one house, but one person is allowed to go start eating here and walk to another area. And the other Tana learned it exactly the opposite. That you can do it in two houses, but you're not allowed to.
So what's the chiddush of this Mishnah? We already said you can have two chaburas on one Pesach. Is this to say that you can make?
I think it's on Pei Amar Aleph going over to Pei Amar Beis, and it's dashing the pasuk of Lo Soitzi Min Habayis Min Habasar Chutza. The question is if we're talking about the people or if we're talking about the Korban Pesach. I'm sorry, I think you were saying.
So the Mishnah already said previously that you can have two chaburas on one Pesach. So what is the chiddush of this?
Only according to one shita. It's a machlekes tanoim.
So is this?
So this would have to be going according to that shita, that you can have two chaburas on one Korban Pesach.
Okay, so according to that shita, what's the chiddush of this? That you can make you can separate the chaburas right at the last minute? They didn't register as two chaburas; they registered as one chabura, and then they're making it into two chaburas at the very last minute.
I guess so. Why can't that be the chiddush of the Tana himself? That I hold, it's anything that's machlokes and a Tana expresses an opinion on, that's a built-in chiddush. Because the moment there's someone who opposes that halacha, when you say it, it's automatically a chiddush. Because you're saying I don't hold on like the Tana who disagrees with
right. So what are we learning from this?
That's the halacha.
Uh-huh.
That the Tana thing that is what you learn from here is that the halacha is like me, and this will work.
Uh-huh.
Because you might think you couldn't do this. I think we better stop here. It's already 6:52. We'll have to stop here. But this is a very geschmackig gemara. This is a very geschmackig gemara about people who do things together, and some people take more than their fair share. Okay.
George, you made it back.
Yes, Baruch Hashem. How could you tell?
The scenery is